Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. So this is episode 3 of the Integra build. Last update was over Christmas time. You saw the engine had just been put into the car, and there was a lot of work getting done to the fuel system. So yeah, a month down the road, we're a little bit further on. We've got some exciting updates for you, and the car's getting very close to being complete. So I'll hand you over to Josh, the technician, and he can give you a walk around, a little bit more in-depth overview of what we've done in the last month, and fill you in on the details.
Right guys, we're a little bit further on from the last time that you would have seen any content on our channel. We've come forward quite far. If you've seen Jamie's recent video, you'll see how far we've come. But if you haven't, then we'll go through it all now in a bit more detail as well. I think from memory, the last time that we was left off with the car is that it was just before Christmas. The engine just got dropped in and started on the fuel system. I think the fuel tank was mounted and maybe some of the fuel lines, but regardless of that, if you have a look in here, you can see stuff's looking quite different now, looking complete. We shine a light at this moment in time. The car has been in a position where it has moved under its own power and has run, which is all good news. But just to run through a few things, so yeah, you got your fuel tank. At some point along the way we painted it because we didn't like the look of the shininess. All the fuel lines, so each individual fitting had to get worked out what fitting you'd need, get them ordered in, the fuel lines. Obviously each of these fuel lines, each hose is cut to length and put together and assembled, etc. by ourselves. Swell pot, went through that last time, but just to recap, that's basically just a multi-pump fuel swell pot, sorry. That's just got 2 Ball-Before 50s in it. Ethanol content sensor down here, and that basically is part of the return line coming back from the engine. You've also got your, so that's a dash 6 return, sorry, and then you've got a dash 8 feed coming along. So these both go through little bulkheads just for a little bit of a cleaner look, etc. For now, the water meth system has been left in place, but it isn't attached, if that makes sense. Basically there's a nozzle and a controller which aren't plumbed in. Next to that you've got the lift pumps. So they're all finished now, quite nice with all the little manifolds, etc. So that's just taking a feed from a main tank, and all their sole purpose is just to take fuel from here and put them into a swell pot, and then that overflows once it gets full back into the main tank. Yeah, you can see it all sort of fits in quite nice. You've got a breather at the back here with a rollover valve, so it's just little things to keep in mind of. The rollover valve is so if in the instance that this car was ever crashed, hopefully not, but you know, the job of that is so fuel doesn't come flowing out through the breather, you know, because that's how fires happen, etc. and these cars go up. So it's just a little precautionary thing to have. Quite a lot of wiring. There's a lot of stuff going on behind here that you can't see, but basically there's just like a wiring limb going from around this area along the back and back up to the ECU. What that's mainly for as well, the ethanol content sensor. It's been spoken about that we're going to be going a digital dash, so that's why we'll be able to run a fuel level gauge now with what's in this tank, so you can wire that up straight to the dash and be able to see what the fuel level is at. Yeah, so we're in the interior now. As you can see, it's looking a lot more complete now. It's pretty much there or thereabouts, bar a couple of little panels. Got a little cover down in the ECU area, etc. Centre console's now all back in, fits quite nicely, even with the extra tunnel for the prop shaft, etc. You know, this has had to have some modification. Basically, all like along the bottom of here, I've just had to cut basically like a couple of inches off, if you want to look at it like that. Just to allow the clearance, just allow for seats to slide back and forth, because it's sort of bulging out the back bottom of the tunnel, bottom of the centre console, sorry. Yeah, so the sequential shifter itself was a bit challenging to get in a nice place, shall we say. The gear cable and basically like the adjustment was really close to basically being maxed out, with the shifter being quite close to the dash. Basically I couldn't bring it further back. So it's kind of hard to explain, but basically I ended up extending a part of a linkage and moving a bracket back on the box, and all that did was give me basically that extra bit of space I needed just to bring it back far enough, so like when you're shifting forwards you're not smashing your fists through the head, you're not a dash. And as you can see, it landed pretty much in the middle of where the old shifter would have been anyway, so it looks quite nice like that, I think. To mount it, all it is just a bit of 12mm thick alley plate, and that's just got basically the bolt hole pattern for the Crv shifter adapted onto the stock bolt pattern, if that makes sense. So you can just literally bolt the plate in and then bolt the shifter on top of that. So yeah, it's quite nice and strong, and obviously stiffens things up. And you can see here, like you got your neutral and your reverse and your first, etc. So it's all working quite nicely. Drive-by-wire conversion that I've spoken about in Jamie's video. So since then it has been done, it's all been done, it's all sorted and finished and it's working. So yeah, the nice thing about having something like a Cyvex ECU, you know, other brands I like them as well, but we personally like Cyvex here. You know, is the room for growth, for expandability, you know, the fact that you're not always limited to one particular product, shall we say. So like with the upgrade of going drive-by-wire, you know, that pedal down there is out of an Evo 10. That's because the Evo 10s are drive-by-wire from factory. Basically, you just need some form of electronic way of sending information of where the pedal position is to the ECU. So you can use anything, to be quite honest, but the Evo 10 pedals was something we had around, and it matches the pedals. The angle was quite nice. It was quite easy to adapt. So once you get that in place, you know, all it is just wiring it to the ECU with a couple of inputs, etc. And then yeah, once we get under the engine bay, I'll show you about the drive-by-wire throttle itself, but that's just a Bosch 68mm unit there, quite regularly available. Cyvex itself, there's been quite a bit of work in here. So the plug and play kit itself consists of basically, so we opted for an S7 Plus. Basically you can get like an S7i or an S7 Plus. S7 Plus has got more inputs basically, it's the easiest way of explaining it. That comes with basically like a plug and play adapter harness, so where stock plugs into the stock loom, and then that'll then plug into the new ECU, so it's just a jumper harness. You know, that's enough to get like a stock car running, but with something like this, you know, obviously there's no provisions for something with like a sequential or fuel, you know, this bigger fuel system sort of thing, and whatever extra sensors you'll be running under the bonnet. So there's quite a bit of added extra wiring. I had made like a sub harness just to make things easier for all the additional stuff I've put under the bonnet to run to the Cyvex ECU, and that consists of stuff like your coolant pressure, oil pressure, fuel pressure, oil temperature, gear position sensor, NOx sensor, you know, just naming a few off my head. So that's why I opted to make just that little sub harness, because it's just easier rather than trying to use old wires or splice into an old loom or anything like that, do you know what I mean? Engine bay, a lot's happened. Obviously, we mentioned it's running now, so it's complete pretty much. A lot has gone on underneath here, a lot of stuff, to be quite honest. To start off with, fuel system. We always talk about the fuel system, don't know why, but it's just one of them where it's just a long process. So yeah, we'll just start off, we'll just go through it all. So we've got dash 8 feed, dash 6 return, sorry, coming up. They're all heat sleeved and protected, kept as far away from a heat source as possible within reason, you know. This engine bay is surprisingly quite tight once you start packing all the stuff, especially like the turbo kit and everything all in, do you know what I mean? Yeah, so the fuel line's coming along. Found a little spot for the regulator down there. That's just a little turbo smart. That's on the return side. So the job with that is basically so you can control the fuel pressure. You know, something like 2 great big fuel pumps like Walker 450s, you need to be able to control the fuel pressure anyway. In the fuel pressure regulator, you've got a fuel pressure sensor. So that's there for multiple reasons. Just to rattle through them. Setting base pressure on the fuel system to begin with, that's very critical. You know, you don't want to have not enough pressure or too much pressure. Also, at the same time, the Cyvex ECU can monitor that. You can obviously set up all these little like, limp mode or trips, etc. So if for some reason on boost, you're just going to, you know, if the ECU was to see fuel pressure drop, you know, you can basically do whatever you want it to do, you know, as drastically as turning the engine off, but you wouldn't recommend that obviously because you could crash a car, but it can do basically like where you can put it into like a limp home mode, drive-by-wire throttle, yet again, you know, something like that. It can basically shut the throttle down to 50%, you know, like, so the max opening would be 50%, so instantly you would know something's wrong, and you could go then go back through the data logs and see what's going on and see if you've got a fuel pressure drop. Yeah, so from dash 8 coming all the way around, that's just going up to the rail here, feeding the original 1300cc injectors. The injectors were already on the previous setup on the engine. All I've done is had them sent away, flow tested and checked, make sure they're all good, and they've come back beautifully fine. So happy with it. We'll see how they are going forwards. It should be enough for the setup we're going for. I mean, yeah, it's just a return coming out of there, going back to the regulators, as I said, went back to the tank. As you can see, all the turbo kit, so you've got this nice Thermomet heat shielding on. That's on the manifold. You know, they've done a real nice job of all of that stuff. Really impressed with it. With it being running as well, you know, it does hold for heating quite nice actually. Not knocking it or anything, you know, sometimes you just don't realise how well a product could work without realising. So yeah, really impressed with them. You know, the little blanket around the wastegate and the exhaust housing itself along there. This part here is all temporary, so the next job on the car is to have an exhaust made, so that'll have the external gate plumbed into, I don't know, we can call it the upper pipe showing now, because the exhaust is going to be going north out the bonnet. All the sub harness stuff, you might not be able to see it on camera, but believe me, it's there. You can sort of see a little bit of it here where it comes up to the coolant pressure sensor. There's many of stuff like that, etc. You know, some stuff underneath the inlet manifold as well, but yeah, knock sensor, coolant pressure. You know, I think I went through a couple of them earlier on, so you know, it's got most of it pretty much. You know, you want to make sure that the ECU has got as much information as it has. You know, the more information that ECU has got, you know, the better chance, you know, you stand at making sure that nothing goes wrong, you know. Drive-by-wire throttle, so yeah, that was mentioned before, so we'll quickly go through this. This is just a Bosch Motorsport 68mm drive-by-wire throttle. You know, there's various different sort of designs or orientations or sizes. The most common ones that you see sort of like that people use for upgrades, you know, like for Skylines, Supras, you know, anything really. They vary from like 68, 72, correct me if I'm wrong, 82, and like a 90. The bore on this manifold is a 70mm, so I went for a 68 because that's the closest that I can get to. So that wasn't just a bolt-on job, unfortunately. This Skunk 2 Ultra manifold had a funny bolt pattern on the flange itself. Basically, there's 4 bolt holes, 3 of them lined up nicely, but one of them was off centre. So all I've had done is one of the bolt holes welded up, the idle air control valve port, where we're drawing extra air as a standard setup. That's been welded up and it's all been linished, and basically drilled a new hole, and then had, you know, once you've done that and tap it out, then this throttle bolts on straight quite nicely. But with deleting the original throttle, you know, you do have some stuff left over, you know, like original map sensor wiring, idle air control valve wiring, the original TPS, so there's some stuff you can reuse from there. So yeah, quickly before we have a look underneath, we'll just quickly run over the brakes. I know Jamie had covered it in his video. K-Sport had quite kindly to hook him up with a K-Sport big brake kit for the DC5. So this is a bolt-on kit. I think he had mentioned in his video they do 2 different sizes of discs. This is the smaller size, for memory, 330mm. That's only because of the wheel size. But yeah, no, he went for the 8-pot setup, finished in gloss red, sort of to match the OEM feel type thing, as the original calipers, sorry, would have been red. Fitment wise, they're not too bad, to be quite honest. You know, there's a little bit more involved than the standard brake setup, do you know what I mean? All it is where the calipers, you've got an adapter bracket which goes into the stock location, and then from there, you know, you can bolt your caliper and your disc on. All there really is just, you know, little shim washers. So what you have to do is just take a couple of measurements, and basically you've got to try and get the caliper central and the disc central to one another, if that makes sense, to, you know, obviously so you don't end up with like more pressure one side or one thing being off centre from another. So that's the only sort of, I'd say, extra thing you have to bear in mind when you're fitting stuff like this, but you might have to do a few adjustments or take them on and off a couple of times just to shim them up and get them where they need to be. So right now that's obviously all done, they've all bled up. They seem to feel quite nice whilst driving about, but at the moment none of the brakes are bedded in, do you know what I mean? They're all brand new pads and discs. but hopefully they'll be really good when it comes to the time. So yeah, we'll quickly raise the car up, we'll have a quick look underneath the car, go through anything that has changed or how it is now. We're under the car now. Not a lot has changed in terms of some stuff you may have seen, but we'll quickly go through everything that has been done. Obviously, quite a lot. Obviously, you can see the engine and gearbox, etc. from underneath here. You've got your Crv Sequential gearbox, uses a stock CRV Balausen, that's how you get the four-wheel drive. Hooked up to a stock transfer box for now. See how it does. I know they take a bit of power. Time will soon tell. Going up to the prop here before we get any further backwards. So this is a standard wagon prop with the viscers, apart from basically this piece here is shortened. This is shortened by, don't ask me how much now, but it's like 100mm from memory or something like that. Basically the standard one was too long, so we had it cut down, and then it's just got an adapter plate because this goes from a different bolt pattern to the K-series transfer box flange. All works nice, no vibration or anything like that. Yeah, the car drives actually really, really nice in all fairness. Going around, obviously, all looks kind of stock from here, but there's a lot going on, as we all know. Built engine, everything's all refreshed, new, replaced, upgraded, etc. To some people who do know these cars, this doesn't look normal, but this is the Crv Subframe. This is another thing that you have to work, to use to make it all work, shall we say. The biggest thing is basically it's got the clearance for the prop and the transfer box in this area. The DC5 ones, if you look at it, it's almost like a big round tube going along here. Yeah, the standard DC5 subframe is obviously no good. Change it over. For the CRV one, that is still using the same DC5 lower arms. There's just a few little differences. I think a long time ago we spoke about it. There's a little bit of clearance on the bulkhead you have to do up here for the rear mount, for where the gearbox would sit. As you can see, it gets really tight in this area along here. There is a gap, trust me, and there's not a lot of, shall we use the word massaging, I think it's what we did, but it's basically just, you have to sort of like, rather than it being a flat piece, you sort of just give it a little curve, that's all. So there's nothing too bad there. You can see your fuel lines coming along here now. So the standard fuel lines, well, the standard system, shall we say, the fuel system itself was a deadhead system or a returnless system. Whereas with something like this, opted for basically its own feed and its own return, so you can have basically more flow, more fuel, more control. It's probably the easiest way of putting it, and that just routes along the standard, the standard fit in as usual. So yeah, the last time Jamie was down here, we'd gone through the options of exhaust, etc. I think he'd spoken to a few people that he knew about getting exhaust made. The original idea was to still go out the back, so as standard, forgetting this was here, the exhaust would come over the standard subframe and come along in this direction and flow like that. So the only difficulty is basically from here to here. You could probably get something to come through here, but it would be tight. But the biggest problem is that to get clearance, it would probably end up coming down really low. So Jamie had spoken to quite a few people. He'd come back with basically he wanted to go out the bonnet, which is obviously a lot easier. You know, you're not having to deal with all of this. There's obviously a few little challenges up top as well with the space itself, but that's the route he's opted for, so that should be quite interesting. Yeah, so this is where most of the main work has sort of been to begin with. Sort of now it's done, you sort of forget about it and you just concentrate on the engine side of things, you know. But yeah, obviously all of this is custom made. Well, yeah, made in house by ourselves. You know, viscous mount, coupling brackets, etc., to hold them in place. You know, once upon a time, this tunnel section was never here. That was just flat floor. Sorry, you can sort of see where it comes through, etc. But yeah, it turned out quite nice in the end. The prop's quite nice and high up as well. One thing I was quite worried about was it being too low. You know, the worst thing, you know, the last thing you want to be doing is catching your prop on like speed bumps or something stupid like that. Do you know what I mean? So I'm quite happy with how that finished off. Working handbrake, that's all sort of been modified and made to work. I think because of using the CRV hubs, I ended up having to swap the handbrake cables left to right. I think that's because of the way the brackets, well, the normal fixing points would clash on CRV hubs, that's right. So if you flip them side to side, then they won't clash, and then all you have to do is swap over a couple of little brackets and make it work that way. So this car now has been geoed. So in the videos, I don't know if anyone would have noticed, but you definitely noticed it in person that the back end used to sit quite high up and the front quite on its nose. And obviously with doing all the four-wheel drive conversion and different hubs, etc., you know, all the geo was a bit out of whack. So I managed to get, well, I sorted out the rear shocks, just needed a spring preload and the height adjusting. It was just all out of proportion for what's been happening, etc. So I sorted that out, levelled the car out, went to geo the car, and unsurprisingly, I couldn't get my toe. Basically, the rear wheels were towing out quite a lot. I can't remember from the top of my head, but trust me, it was quite a lot. And that's because of obviously the mix and match of different Honda parts, etc. The way I got around that is, so here is your toe adjustment. So this works just with like an eccentric bolt, and you can see basically where it would sort of push from either side of these little tabs here to either push the hub in or out. You know, that's what gives you your toe. So the max adjustment I had on that, I was still well out of specification. So all I've done is I've pushed the original inserts out, and various different companies will do the same. Same idea, shall I say? But where you look at the insert, normally it would just be like a steel insert with like an M10 hole. Yeah, so as I just mentioned, I couldn't get my toe into specification. So with this eccentric bolt, etc., you know, basically it was maxed out on one lug and it was still towing out massively. So what a lot of companies do is what I've done basically. So I've pushed the insert out of this, and all it is basically so say it's like this size of diameter, it'd be like a long insert in the bush, and it'd be like an M10 hole. And what a lot of people do for like little upgrades, etc., is they'll off-center the hole. So basically, when you push that insert in, you can basically push that in basically with the off-centered hole either to like the left or to the right, which gives you a bit more adjustment. And then you can put your eccentric bolt in and have adjustment from that point, if that makes sense. So we've had a couple of inserts made, stuck them in. So the eccentric bolt would have been facing this way, so it would have pushed the hub out to give me a bit more toe in. And then since adjusting the standard toe adjustment, on top of that, I managed to get my specification back in, so like 0 toe or something like that. So yeah, that was a win, because I was a little bit worried at one point that I wasn't going to be able to do that. I was going to have to try and think of something really good, but yeah, no, that worked out. Right guys, yeah, so it's the following day from the last little snippet you saw, or whatever. You can see things are a little bit different in the engine bay now. Nothing horrendous going on, just a few little changes here and there, as usual. One thing first is, I've got this little adapter here. This is for the drive-by-wire throttle. If you get a little bit of a close-up on here, with the drive-by-wire throttles, you can see there's not much purchase area, and we're not really designed for a hose, shall we say, or a silicone pipe to clamp down and actually get a nice sort of clamping pressure, if that makes sense. It would probably quite easily blow off or create issues in the future. So what quite a lot of people do is make a little adapter like this, and all this does is got a little O-ring that you put on a drive-by-wire throttle, and you bolt this on the front of it, sort of thing like this. And all you do is bolt that down, and it just allows you to have that bigger purchase area to get silicone down, so you don't end up with something blowing off or anything like that. So that's one thing I'm doing today. The other thing is quite obvious, is the turbos back off. Obviously the car was running, etc. Not a big issue, but a little issue. So yeah, the car was running quite happily, all good, etc. Done a couple of heat cycles with it. Everything seemed all hunky-dory, sort of thing. Took it for a little drive around on site, and could immediately tell that something wasn't quite right, if you know what I mean. It just didn't feel like it was even trying to make any boost or anything like that. Not that you're boosting it hard, but normally you could hear it, sort of thing. So I pulled back in, checking things out, and basically the bearings of the turbo, once it gets warmth or a bit of heat coming through it, the bearings of the turbo have basically failed. Not too sure why. It wasn't a brand new turbo, but before we fitted it, obviously checked it all out, everything felt nice, etc. It had been previously been used by Jamie when he first done the turbo conversion on this anyway. But yeah, it's just one of them unfortunate things that it's failed. Luckily we caught it now, rather than when it was, you know, you're trying to drive it down the road or trying to do something with it. no damage done, it's just a failed unit. Obviously quite a few people will be thinking about like oil feed and drains, you know, was there oil flow going through it? Yeah, 100%, we've already checked it all out, you know, double checked again afterwards, you know, it had oil going to turbo, oil coming out of a drain was all good. So we're just working out ideas, what sort of new unit we're going to go for, whether we're going to go like for like or whether we're just going to go for a different similar sized unit. And then once that's here, we can get it on the car and get an exhaust made and keep going from there. That's it guys, that's this week's little update. Not much more that we can do or we can show at this moment in time until we get a replacement turbo. Once we get the turbo, we can crack on with it, get the turbo on, get its exhaust made, and then from there get it back up and running. All should be well on that side of things, and then start running it in. Once it's running, then you'll start seeing a bit more details and content, and hopefully soon in the future see it getting tuned. But that's all. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.